What if your availability is the very thing making you invisible? What if the more present you are for others, the more absent you become to yourself? What if the pain you feel isn't because they left, but because you kept showing up for people who never truly arrived for you? You give, you wait, you answer. You cancel plans, shift your boundaries, become more flexible, more forgiving, more available, and still they drift. Still they forget. Still they disappear. And you start to wonder, what's wrong with me? But Carl Jung would ask a different question, not about them, but about the part of you that believes love is earned through self-abandonment. You weren't born this way. You were conditioned. Somewhere someone taught you that love means proving your worth through access. That presence equals value. That loyalty must be unconditional, even when it costs your peace. And now, your body flinches at the thought of being unavailable, as if choosing yourself is an act of betrayal. But what if the true betrayal is staying open to those who only value you when you're easy to reach, easy to take, easy to leave? What if, by being constantly available, you've blurred the boundary between connection and control and called it love? Keep watching, because the moment you stop being available, everything begins to shift. Not because others change, but because you do. You were trained to equate availability with love. To believe that if you're always there, always answering, always forgiving, then people will finally see your worth. But they don't. Because worth isn't something you give away, it's something you hold. And the moment you overextend, you start disappearing, not to them, to yourself. Carl Jung warned us that we attract what we are, not what we want. If your identity is built on being emotionally accessible, overly responsive, endlessly patient, you will attract those who take, not because they are cruel, but because your unconscious keeps repeating a story. If I'm available enough, maybe I'll finally be loved. You reply instantly. You say yes when you want to say no. You listen, absorb, carry everyone else's pain, but where do you place your own? You exist as a space for others, hoping one day someone will notice how much you give. But notice isn't love, and your presence has become a currency others spend without ever paying you back. There's a hidden fear that if you stop being available, they'll stop caring. That silence equals rejection. That space equals abandonment. But what if the opposite is true? What if your constant availability is what's pushing them away? Because what's always accessible loses its sacredness. What costs nothing is rarely valued. Jung spoke of the self as a center, a sacred core we must protect. When you ignore that center in order to stay emotionally open, you fragment, you exist in pieces, you stretch so far into someone else's world that you forget your own shape. And the more they drift, the harder you try, until one day you realize you were never in the relationship. You were orbiting it. You begin to see a pattern. The more you overgive, the more distant they become. The more you chase, the more they run. The moment you pause, they reappear. Not out of love, but out of entitlement. They miss your energy, not your soul. They crave your availability, not your essence. And you start to feel like a resource, not a human. But the shift begins when you stop being available. When you stop answering out of guilt. When you stop being emotionally on call for those who only show up when it's convenient. At first there's fear, a trembling inside you that says, you're being selfish, you'll lose them. But that voice isn't truth, it's trauma. You learn to sit in the silence, to let unanswered texts stay unanswered, to watch people walk away and realize they were never truly standing with you to begin with. Your worth doesn't rise and fall with their attention. Your value isn't determined by how reachable you are, it's found in how rooted you are. And slowly, the world reorganizes itself around your new center. The ones who only loved your availability disappear. The ones who love your presence stay. Not because you begged, not because you proved anything, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself to earn proximity. Carl Jung believed that the self heals when we reclaim the energy we've projected outward. And that's what happens when you stop being available. You retrieve your soul. You become whole. You no longer ask others to validate what you already are. And in that space, quiet, sacred, still, everything begins to change. And suddenly, the silence doesn't feel like abandonment anymore. It feels like clarity. You realize that your availability was never a gift. It was a survival strategy, a way to earn belonging, a way to prove that you were enough, if only you stayed open long enough. But the people who truly see you don't need your suffering to stay. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for resting. You stop shrinking your needs to make space for others who never asked how much it cost you to be so present. Carl Jung would say, you are withdrawing your projections. And in that withdrawal, you are remembering who you were before you became someone's emotional support system. You no longer respond from fear. You respond from truth. You no longer chase connection, you embody it. Your energy stops leaking. Your attention returns home. And the people who once thrived on your overextension find nothing left to consume. That is not loss. That is liberation. Now, when you are unavailable, it isn't punishment, it's protection. Not against others, but for yourself. You are learning that your time is sacred. Your presence is precious. And not everyone should have access to it, especially not those who only knock when they're empty, never when they're full. The shift is quiet. You don't make announcements, you don't burn bridges, you just stop building them toward places that never built back. You stop asking if they'll notice, you stop wondering if they'll come back, because you're not gone. You're just finally here, in your own life, in your own body, in your own worth. And here, you feel different. Not harder, not colder, just whole. There's no bitterness, only boundaries, no resentment, only rest. You've stopped pouring into others to avoid the emptiness inside, because the emptiness wasn't a void. It was a space waiting for you to return. Let this be the turning point, the breath where you no longer equate love with availability. The moment when your silence becomes your sanctuary. The night you stop answering calls that only come when you're needed, never when you're cherished. You are no longer on demand. You are not a service. You are not a substitute for presence. You are a soulness, and your availability must be earned, not assumed, because the version of you who always said yes was only trying not to be left behind. If something in you softened or cracked while listening, hold that space. Sit in it. Let it teach you what no one ever did, that being unavailable is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself. And if this felt like truth, then stay. Not for the next video, but for the next version of you. Subscribe to that version. Share this with someone who still gives too much. And come back, because the next story is not about being seen. It's about seeing yourself.